Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. The Our Driving Concern Employer Traffic Safety Program is pleased to be able to offer the webinar, Sharing the Road with Large Trucks. I want to welcome our presenters this morning, Donnie Tulk, Program Coordinator with Tulsa Technology Center, and Lisa Robinson, Senior Program Manager with Our Driving Concern. A few things to note before we get started. Everyone should be muted, but just in case, if everyone would please hit *6, star 6, just to make sure. Again, it's *6, and that will mute you, and that will ensure that all the background noise and confidentiality for all attendees. So again, it's *6. You do have the ability to type questions during the webinar, and the presenters will address questions at the end. A PDF of the presentation was made available for your note-taking, and if you had any problems printing it off, please let me know. If you should encounter any problems or issues, please just type a message and let us know. The presenter's contact information will be available on the last slide, and there's a very brief post-event survey at the conclusion of the webinar. Because this program is funded through grant dollars and provided at no cost to employers, we would greatly appreciate your feedback. And again, for those of you that are just joining, hit *6 to mute yourself. And with that, I welcome Donnie and Lisa, and we'll turn it over to them to begin.
Thank you, Deanne. Thank you, Donnie, for joining us today.
Welcome. Pleasure to be here.
I want to make sure everybody can see my screen okay. Can you see my screen?
I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Today we've got a lot of different topics we want to talk about, and I'm really glad that we're offering it, and I'm glad, Donnie, that you're here to talk about a few different things with us today. The reason I mention this is, people are frustrated with big trucks, and passenger cars. People in large trucks are kind of frustrated with passenger cars. So I think it's really good to start talking a little bit about the trucking industry and what we can expect. So there's a few different things that I'd like to make sure we cover today. Blind stops, stopping distances, the turning radius, and work zones and rural roads, some of those really important key components. And I think, Donnie, you can speak to these really well. So let's get started this morning. What can you tell me a little bit about blind spots when it comes to passenger cars and trucks?
Well, first of all, the blind spots are the area, and we call them no zones in the trucking industry. Those are typically the areas that you want to stay out of as far as in a passenger vehicle. The no zones are mainly right in front of the vehicle, right behind the vehicle, and on each side to the left and the right in the areas that the mirrors do not cover. Those are dangerous areas to be in because the drivers cannot see you. So we call them no zones to let the passenger vehicles let them know that it's a zone they don't want to be in. Don't go there.
I love the expression of no zone. I think blind spots are great, but I really like the expression of no zone. I think it's a really great way to communicate what people need to know and be aware of. That's an excellent term and an excellent phrase. I see on here, the difference of the 20 feet, 30 feet, one lane. So what can you tell us about that when you're looking at that? Is that something for the truck driver to be aware of as well as the passenger car?
Yes, everyone driving on the roadway should be aware of that, not only just the truck drivers. As you see on the screen, as far as the no zones there, typically looking at the one in the rear of the vehicle, you'll see on some trucks that say, if you can't see my mirrors, I can't see you. And that's true because you're tucked up behind that truck and the trailer of the truck, and the driver can't really see you. So if they have to, hit their brakes for some reason or something like that, you're not going to be able to stop because you're in that zone. He didn't see you back there. In front, the 20-foot, you need to stay out 20 foot in front of the truck because it's hard to see. So on some of the trucks, look over the hood to see you out there in front of it. So if you have to stop in a passenger vehicle quickly or take some evasive action, it's harder for the truck to get stopped. On the left and the right, basically stay out of those areas where they can't. The driver can't see you in the mirrors there. That's kind of a tough area there because of limited visibility.
Hey, Donnie, tell me something. With new technology, how's the trucking industry and the large trucks with lane, lane departure, lane, the collision mitigation systems. What do we see with the large trucks on our roads today?
Well, Lisa, we're encouraging the motoring public, like you said, not to hang out in those no zones. Don't just hang out there and drive on the side of the truck or tailgate, because it's just now starting to get into the industry in the last few years, the collision mitigation systems like we have in vehicles now. For quite some time, passenger cars have had the collision mitigation systems, whether it was a light on your mirrors on the left or right, your door mirrors, something like that. Well, the trucking industry has been getting involved in that more and more, and not all trucks have collision mitigation systems on them yet. I do foresee that it will be mandated in the future that all Class 8 trucks that are built come with the collision mitigation systems on them. But as of right now, there's more companies that are putting them on the trucks, but you can't be guaranteed that every truck on the road has one as of yet.
That's a really good point. I'm going to move on to another question I have for you. Let's talk about tailgating. People are really frustrated, and I see that more and more when people are driving, that they're tailgating, they're following too closely, and people are, a really aggressive driving is how I had a police officer the other day describe it. Was really that's aggressive driving. What do you think is so important about being aware of? And when we talk large trucks, it can be the same with somebody pulling a tractor trailer that could have livestock in it. So why is it really important that people don't tailgate these large trucks?
Well, for one thing, you can't see around the truck and the trailer. You don't know what's happening in front of you, and there's no way for you to make an evasive emergency maneuver if you have to without hitting the truck. Those trucks are big, and they can't stop on a dime, but in hindsight, if they have to slam on the brakes, for instance, for lack of better words, you're probably going to rear end that truck. Now, the bumpers on these trailers are really strong. You're going to do a lot of damage to your vehicle, and you're going to get in a situation where you could have some life-threatening injuries. So for the safety aspect, for you as a passenger car driver, and for the trucks, you don't want to tailgate these things because the drivers can't see you, and if something happens, you could wind up underneath that truck if you have to stop in a situation.
Well, you mentioned two things that I think are really, really key. You mentioned what I heard you say was risk. There's huge risk because it's very big risk for the passenger car especially. I also, I've seen, and I bet you have also have seen, and others have seen pictures where the vehicles that sit pretty low to the ground, when they rear end a truck, they do have the risk of going underneath that trailer. And as you mentioned, severe bodily injury, correct?
Oh, that's correct. That's correct. There are situations that, a lower profile vehicle, a car, smaller cars, can go up underneath that. And usually what happens in that situation is you get a fatality out of that. Right now there is a group that is advocating, this kind of goes off the tailgating, but the sides of the truck, to put guards on the sides to keep cars from going underneath the side of the trailers. But same thing in the rear. We've put the bumpers all the way across the back of the trailers, but still, those low-profile vehicles can go up underneath there, and if they do, it's usually not a very good outcome.
So that bumper still doesn't mitigate the risk. That bumper still, it's a preventative, but it still doesn't mitigate the risk, nor does it take the responsibility of the driver's behavior. Really, it's a way to stay the safest, is what I'm hearing you say.
Correct. It's going to mitigate the risk only to a certain point. You're correct.
So let's talk about passing, because I'm aware of somebody who was following a tractor trailer a little too closely. They pulled left to go past, and they were hit head on. So passing safely, that's something for myself that I'm always extremely cautious about and concerned with. So how can a car or another vehicle pass that truck safely?
Well, one thing you want to do, of course, you want to stay far enough behind the truck where the truck driver can see you in the lane that you're going to attempt to pass them. turn your left blinker on. Always use your signal when you're passing out, and we're talking about passing to the left, especially on two-lane roads. You always want to, make sure that you're in a no passing zone. You've got a lot of room to pass the vehicles. You're fixing to overtake a tractor trailer that is 70 to 75 feet in length. So you want to make sure that you can see that driver when you start to pass. Turn your blinker on. Let the vehicles behind you know that you're going to pass the vehicle, and always make sure that you're on a flat stretch of road. Do not ever try to pass on a hill or around a hill, over a hill, around a curve, anything like that. You need to look at that and make sure that you have plenty of room to pass that vehicle, because it is going to take you a longer amount of time to get around that vehicle.
Well, tell me a little bit, people seem to think that, their turn signals really aren't always necessary. Tell me about the necessary need to make sure that we're using those turn signals, especially when it comes to passing.
Well, I tell you, that is my pet peeve, Lisa. My son's a police officer, and I tell him all the time, I wish that you would write everyone a ticket who doesn't use their turn signal. We have to communicate what we're doing. When we're driving, we have to communicate. Well, one way that we communicate with other drivers is by our turn signals. We have to let this, very important, you have to let people know what your intentions are. You have to communicate those intentions, and using the turn signals are very important. If I'm driving a truck and I see a car that's behind me and I see they have their left turn signal on, that's going to tell me that they're going to get out to pass me. I'm expecting that. So if I see oncoming traffic on down that they can't see, I know that I may have to slow down to let that vehicle pass me safely. Changing lanes, making turns, it's very important. It's very, very frustrating when you don't know what that other driver's doing. We're not mind readers, so no one is, whether you're driving a car or a truck. But always use that signal. Always communicate your intentions and let the other drivers know what you're going to do.
Good point. Tell me something. Is there a difference when it comes to passing on a flat stretch of road versus a hill or a downgrade? What can you share with that?
Well, yes, on a flat stretch of road, you can see further. You can see any oncoming traffic or anything like that. Around a curve or over a hill, you cannot see. Now, coming down a downgrade, what you got to be aware of is if you go to pass a truck on a downgrade, the truck is usually loaded, so it's going to be heavier and it's going to have more force, more momentum coming downhill, and it's going to be going faster. And you got to remember this too: if you pass that vehicle and you have to slow down, the truck behind you coming down the hill, his brakes are gonna have to work harder to get stopped coming down that hill. So you got to be aware of those things as well.
Okay, good point. Really good points. Let's talk about stopping distance. Something you mentioned, because you made a comment a minute ago regarding the weight of the vehicle and the difficulty to be stopping and that. Tell me a little bit more about how long it takes a fully loaded semi to stop.
Okay, like you can see on the screen here, a fully loaded tractor trailer running 65 miles an hour, and that's about the median speed nowadays in most states on state highways, and that is, running 65 miles an hour. Well, a fully loaded tractor trailer is going to take about 2 football fields to stop. That's roughly 660 feet. That's a long way to stop that truck. Now, one thing, too, what we need to remember is a empty truck is harder to stop because it has no weight holding them down to the ground. You're going to lose your traction in that, and you're just going to slide. The trailer even with ABS systems on the trucks, a lot of times it's harder for the trucks to stop.
Makes sense. And also, too, if you've just joined us, can you be sure that you mute your phone with a *6, and then at the end we'll be able to go to questions. If anybody types any questions, then we'll be able to go back to those. So So what I'm hearing you also say, this goes back to what you mentioned with tailgating. It's really, really, really important when we think about, stopping distance and the speed that, that all comes into play, right?
That's absolutely right. All that comes into play with that. And like I said, you can't, if you're tailgating a tractor trailer, you can't see what's in front of him or her driving down the road. And, you want to always be able to make that maneuver if you need to prevent an accident with all possibility.
These are really good graphics. So how far back should a vehicle stay? Because this graphic tells me that it's going to take that truck, that truck driving 65 miles per hour, that it's going to take 2 football fields to completely stop. So how far back would we want that passenger car to stay back from that truck?
Well, what you want to do, you want to stay back. What we look at is in following distance as far as vehicles, we look in time. So we would like for cars to stay back about a second for every 10 feet of vehicle they have if they're running 40 miles an hour or under. If they're running over 40 miles an hour, you want to add a second. So just say your vehicle's 15 feet and you're running, 45 miles an hour. You want to be about 5 seconds behind that vehicle or the truck in front of you, just to make sure you had a good, safe following distance.
Well, let's talk about the turning radius, because, a lot of times you'll be at the intersection and that truck is really turning wide and you think they're going to come into your lane. Give me a little bit of, of knowledge that we all need, whether it's the truck driver or the passenger car, when it comes to turning radius in large trucks.
Well, one thing, like you can see on the screen here, what the truck driver has to always contend with is the off-tracking of the trailer, which means that the trailer is going to follow an inside track of where the truck went. And that's one reason for them to have to make the wide turns. Now, what we teach in our professional truck driver training program here at Tulsa Tech is we teach our students to always make a button hook turn whenever possible. Now, that's what you're seeing on the screen. That driver is making a button hook turn. That means that he's going to come out, he or she is going to come out, and they're going to have to get into that oncoming lane once they make the turn. That's why we always, hope that when we're making a right-hand turn, that the vehicles are far enough back. We don't want to have to make traffic back up or anything like that, but we want to also, passenger car vehicle drivers need to be aware that it takes that extra room to turn. You got about 55 feet is your turning radius there. So you always want to be sure in a passenger vehicle to never block the box or stop in front of that line. You get the big white line there at the intersection. Don't stop in front of that line. Try to stay behind that. And also, it's a good rule of thumb to stay behind it a few feet anyway, because if another car comes along and they're not paying attention and texting and driving, and they hit you in the rear end, they can push you out in the intersection. So that's a good rule of thumb. But also stay back a little bit. Don't block that box. One thing, too, if you're following a big truck, never try to beat them to the turn. I've seen it happen where the trucks turn to the right. They're having to make a wide right turn there, and a vehicle will come in on the inside of them, try to beat them to the turn. And the next thing you know, the trailer is running up over the front of the car because the driver, you're kind of in a blind spot there, and he doesn't see that. Don't try to beat that truck to a right-hand turn. Just please be patient.
That seems to be the theme on all these key points that we're bringing up is patience. The speeding, the aggressive driving, following too closely, trying to beat the truck to the turn on a right-hand turn. That patience pays off, and we're not going to get there any sooner, really, when those few seconds aren't really going to make a difference other than saving your life. So that's such a key point that you bring up.
Let's talk about. Ask a question.
We can hear you. Can we hold your question to the very end?
Absolutely. I didn't know the rules, so I'm just jumping in here. That's fine. Go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, if you don't mind. Usually we've got comments, but if you don't mind, we'll do them at the very end. Okay? Thank you so much. Absolutely. So let's talk about load securement. Let's talk a little bit about, this is something that concerns me greatly, and because I've become involved with a woman who is really pushed to have, a load securement day, be recognized. because of her, her daughter losing her life as a result of something coming off the back of the vehicle. And I know for a fact that when I drive, I'm so concerned and watching very carefully about a vehicle that may be carrying something in front of me. So what recommendations do you have regarding, an unsecured or a not well-secured load?
Well, I'll tell you, the FMCSA has regulations clearly stating how we're supposed to secure the cargo. They have cargo securement regulations, regulating the type of tie downs you need, your working load limits on your tie downs and things. This is a dangerous thing. What I can tell, passenger car drivers is watch that following distance. That's another reason you want to keep your following distances, longer, and don't tailgate, because anything can happen. It is the truck driver's responsibility to make sure that the cargo is loaded correctly, it is tied down correctly, but accidents do happen. We understand that. You could get a tie down that has been has a manufacturer's defect that you didn't know about, and the cargo could come loose and come off the back. But I've seen it's definitely getting better in our industry, as far as our industry professionals being aware of this. And like I said, the main thing is watching the following distance. Keep your following distance back far enough where if something does happen, that you can be sure and steer around an object safely or get stopped.
So what about if there is a escort vehicle that's either in front and back or both of that truck, especially when they've got a load? What should we be aware of?
Around the Tulsa area, we see a lot of the windmill towers being manufactured here. There's a place here, and we see a lot of escort vehicles. And when you see one of those escort vehicles, you need to be looking for an oversized load that's coming your direction. If you meet an escort vehicle, you can bet that there's going to be an oversized load coming. So what you need to be prepared for is to get off the side of the road if needed and be looking for that. The oversized loads could be anything from 2 feet hanging over the side of the trailer to a big massive unit that they're taking up the whole road or something like that. So you need to be aware of that. When you meet a escort car, a pilot car or truck, that's what's coming at you. You're going to have a vehicle coming at you. It's going to be a lot wider, taller, heavier. If you're coming up behind one, you can bet that there's going to be one on up in front of you. Usually you can see it. Now, the bigger the cargo, the more distance that the pilot cars have to stay away, and the more pilot cars they have to use. So just be aware of that you're going to be coming up on either meeting or coming up on a oversized truck.
Good, very good point, Donnie. What about work zones? It seems like we're hearing a lot about work zones. We're hearing a lot about the crash statistics, the risk, and it seems like it's definitely a concern that we need to be aware of. What can you tell me about the different types of work zones or the concerns or anything that really should be at the forefront of our thoughts?
Well, one thing about it, too, is truck drivers, that goes back to the following distance, Lisa. You need to be aware that truck drivers, they're going to watch in the work zones because, they cannot stop as quickly as a passenger car. So they're going to be going a little bit slower in the work zone, so be prepared to decrease your speed. And make sure, too, other than the people not using turn signals, another pet peeve of mine is people that run to the very end of a construction area and then jump in front of everybody. That can cause a crash. Be prepared to merge over in plenty of time because you're going to get up in that construction zone, and if you crowd a truck or something like that, you could get in an accident. So just be prepared for that. We need to be vigilant in work zones. As you can see on the screen, there's a work zone crash. It occurs every 5.4 minutes. So I don't know how long we've been on this call so far, but about 30 minutes almost. That means there's been quite a few crashes in work zones on that. 70 work zone crashes result in injuries each day. So, we got to protect those workers out there that are working on our roads too, and just be vigilant around that. But just be aware that trucks are going to move slower through there. 27% of the fatal crashes in work zones involved large trucks, and a lot of that was caused in getting into a crowding situation or something like that, or people not paying attention in the work zones.
Well, and I think patience is still key. I think that's been a theme throughout the entire everything that we've mentioned was patience was a real key component. Also, you made a comment about when a crash occurs, that can create a bottleneck where it's not really possibly the primary crash, but now there's another crash or another crash as a result of that, especially in those work zones. Rural roads, in Oklahoma and Texas where we were working on these particular projects, and I think all states see this, and especially in some states that have got a lot with the oil industry and a lot of trucking, rural roads can be concerning when it comes, and our crash rates are significant in those rural areas. So what are some of the things that drivers that we can do to stay safe? Because, again, what if we're on a 2-lane road? What if it's a gravel road? These various things that come into play.
Right, and as you touched on, Oklahoma and Texas especially, with the rural roads and the oil field industry, a lot of activity going on out there. Like it shows here, 61% of fatal crashes involving a large truck occurred in rural areas. A lot of that is whether it's a passenger car driver or truck driver or motorcycle, whatever case may be, people need to obey the road signs. If you're in a no passing zone, if you can't pass, do not pass. And drive to the conditions. A lot of these times, a lot of rain and things like that, you have that big wide open area. And a lot of times people will have the tendency to relax a little bit, get a little complacent, and they're out there, just looking at the scenery. So you just need to be aware of that. Be aware of those road signs. Watch those intersections, those crossroads. I've seen it happen several times where a vehicle coming off of a side road onto a state highway in a rural area, and they just drive right out in traffic and cause an accident. So just always be aware of that. Obey those road signs. If you have intersections coming up, if you have no passing zones, watch those yellow lines on the road. I can't stress that enough. And communicate your intentions with other drivers.
I think one thing that you said was really clear was the road signs. We see a lot in rural areas. We see this often in a lot of areas, especially in rural areas where they don't think there's traffic coming, so they blow the stop sign. They don't actually stop, or they'll do a rolling stop. And so they haven't actually looked, and they haven't come to a complete stop to ensure that intersection is safe. And it may be a road where, the speed may be significant until they get to that stop sign. So I think that was Absolutely. A really, really, really important point that you made as far as, obeying, watching those yellow, how the road's striped, what's allowed. People sometimes think, well, there's no cars coming, but they don't realize that striping is because the engineers determined that should be a no passing zone. But they think it's okay, but they don't understand that, the speed is because the engineers have determined that is what is safe. One thing you did mention, because we're going to talk about a few tips here, was driving to the conditions of the road. I'd probably add on there patience. A few minutes starting time earlier means you're not going to be late to where you're going, so that you're not so impatient when you're driving. And some of the other things, when we talk about some of the crashes that we know that are happening in some of the work zones, a lot of times we know it's because someone's not paying attention. They're distracted for a myriad of reasons. And so when they crash into a work zone, they haven't been paying attention. They're distracted, whether it's, texting and driving or a variety of things. I think you mentioned the debris, especially what's on the roadway, what's happening. You talked about the weather conditions. Do you have any other tips that you think are helpful? What about night driving versus day driving?
Well, night driving, of course, actually, everyone knows, you can see a lot better during the day. I would increase my following distance at night. That's what I always do, because we don't know what's up ahead. And that one thing about night driving too, don't drive too fast and overdrive your headlights. And there is such a thing as overdriving your headlights. So that's what I would say. Increase that following distance. Watch your speed. Drop your speed down a little bit. I know Texas used to have a different speed limit at night. And that was for that reason to, where you could recognize a hazard and do something about it before it became an accident or put you into a crash or anything.
Hey, Donnie, this has been really great. Do you have any other final thoughts of things that, as we've been talking, has there been anything else that's kind of come to mind that you think is, something that we didn't really cover, something you think we need to emphasize today?
The thing, and you touched on it, Lisa, several times, is patient. I would ask, as far as coming from the trucking industry, please be patient around these trucks. The drivers are not driving slow intentionally when they're taking off from, say, a traffic signal or anything like that. They're big, they're slow, they take up a lot of room, but they're a necessity for us. 77% of all goods move on trucks, and about 98% of everything that you have in your house is moved on truck. I haven't seen a railroad car come up next to a Walmart in a long time. So anyway, just please be patient with trucks out there driving on the road, and just let those drivers know that you're around them.
Well, I really appreciate everything you shared today. Now, I do believe there might be a few questions, so I'm going to see if if there's any comments, and if anyone wants to unmute for a moment and ask a question, I'm sure Donnie would be glad to answer any questions you might have. I believe that someone did, maybe possibly from Dallas, I see.
Yes, ma'am. There's actually a couple things, but I do want to yield to anybody else that might want to jump in there. The first thing is going back to that, you gave the demonstration for the turn. And I train like 1,000 school bus drivers, and I'm calling from a student transportation perspective of some kind here. But on that right-hand turn, you talked about the button hook, and I can't remember if you said this or not, but one thing I always try to emphasize is that they stop behind that white stop line. Does that stop line, when the cities put that down, does it account for that button hook, or does it not, and they have to back up a little bit more when they see a truck?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for everything you do, because I think you might have a harder job than I do teaching bus drivers.
Yeah, it's fun, but it's a lot. There's a lot in common there. And just so you know, my passion for truck driving is very big, because my dad was a truck driver all of his life, so I get it. So, but anyway, thank you.
For the most part, those white lines in most cities, it just depends on the city. Some do account for that for trucks turning, but I can tell you from experience, some of them don't account for that. Okay. So if you went out and talked to the city engineer, I don't think that they figure into that as far as that goes, because I know there's a turn close to our school on a main road that school buses even have a hard time making. They can put that right rear set of duals off over the curb on it. So I think it depends on how the city engineers put it together in the streets. You're going to definitely see it, which on 4-lane roads, or if you have 2 lanes going each way, that are non-divided. I think they take some account in there, but
so it's just not a guarantee, is what it sounds like.
It's not a guarantee, no, not to my knowledge.
Is there anybody else?
Are there any other questions? Anything else that anybody else would like to comment? I don't know that we can see your comments on. I'm not sure. I don't know if we're having some technical difficulties. I don't know if you can still continue to see our screen. Deanne, do you have any closing comments?
I do. I want to thank Donnie and Lisa for this webinar, and I want to thank everyone that attended. We know your time is valuable. We hope you gained some useful information. We do apologize for the technical difficulties. If you would, please take a quick moment and fill out the post-survey webinar. There are a few short questions, and then it does also ask if you would like some additional information. This webinar will be available within the next couple of days on our website, so please check that out. We do try to bring you helpful and quick and easy information that you can take back to your organization and start using immediately. We do have additional webinars coming up, so make sure to check our websites for those as well. And with that, we conclude our webinar, and we wish you a great rest of your day. And with that, have a nice day, and we will end our webinar. Thank you.